Okay, here I want to just talk a little bit about the process of writing code and the process of maybe trying to skip some steps when we write code versus taking things one step at a time. And maybe you can guess which side of that I'm going to be on. But there's kind of a balance between these two ideas in coding that we can make shortcuts in our code or we can take like the long way, and which one might be better. So let me give you an example. This is left over from the last tip I just did. And we had, a number. Somebody wanted to input a number and we wanted to convert it to a float. Now there's another way we could have done this. Is we could have said, number is input, and then we could have said, okay, number is a float of that original number. And so it'll take it as a string and it will convert it on the second line. Now in an algorithm, like if I was to come down here and write my algorithm, I might say, input number, and then I might say number convert to float, and you might argue these are two separate steps, and so therefore they should be two separate lines. Although in some ways you could argue that this is a strange Python thing that you have to do to convert the float. In most languages you wouldn't need to do that, and so it doesn't need to be its own line of the algorithm. You could just assume when you're inputting a number that you're getting a number. But this is basically the argument is it better to put this in one line of code and then you don't have to worry about it again? Or is it better to do a single step for each time? In the input time, I tend to say just do this all at once and kind of get used to always converting your numbers as soon as you input them. But then we get to this idea that there's, these steps in our code, and this would be the input step. And then down here, this math stuff that we do, this is what we would finally call the processing step in our IPO model. And then we get down here and we do our print, and this is our output step. And some people would say, once they understand code, they would say this step is redundant because I can just say print number plus number 2, and I don't need this step because I could just print it out down here. The computer's perfectly happy to just do my output right when I need it, like do the math right when it needs to output it. I don't need to store that in a variable and take up the computer's memory to do that. So this is more efficient and faster to write. And it only took 3 lines of code if I got rid of all my comments, right? And so that must be better. And in some ways it is. There's a few reasons you don't want to do that, but in some ways this works just fine. And a lot of people would do it this way. But let's just say next I want to find the average of the two numbers. And so then what I have to do, see, this time I didn't store this in a variable. So to find the average, what do I have to do? I have to go, all right, I have to print number plus number 2 again, and this time I have to divide by 2. And then I have to say, oh, wait a minute. What's my order of operations here? I have to do an average of something. I'm going to have to put parentheses around this one as well, and then divide by 2. And so it's still, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, and it can find the total, and it can find the average. And hey, I could even put in here total and average. And it's okay to have all these parentheses and everything in here as long as you can keep them straight. But now I'm saying, but look, it's kind of silly. I'm doing the same mathematical calculation both times. So do I need to do that? And so for me, I really like to keep things separate in these steps. Yes, I can make my input more efficient by putting it in one line, because that's all within the input step. But I like to encourage people to use this processing step to create variables that contain their answers. because then when I go to find the average of something, I can take that variable total and I can just divide that by 2. This is a simpler step. I don't have to worry about the redundancy here. I don't have to worry about order of operations because it's a little bit simple. Um, and so I kind of like it this way. And then when I come down here to output them, I just output these things. So you might have to think to yourself, which of these is the way you prefer it. This is the way I prefer it. I find this more readable, less efficient because I'm making 6 lines of code instead of 4 lines of code. And obviously, in a 4 versus 6 is not a big deal, but imagine this becomes a bigger program. And then it starts to be a bigger deal. So it's kind of a debate in coding, and there's not necessarily a right answer. I would encourage you as you start out to do things kind of the long way to make sure your steps are really clear in your head as to what's going on. Plus, again, it can help you later on, like save time because you have everything kind of saved and figured out. And then when you go to output them, it's a little bit easier to just go back and refer to your output, to your process to do your outputs. So I feel like there's something else I wanted to say about that, but I've forgotten it. So I'm going to stop now, and maybe I'll make some exciting sequel when I do remember what I wanted to say.